All right, let's dive in. We're tackling some really big ideas today with your sources exploring the nature of reality itself from both spiritual and scientific perspectives.
It's a fascinating mix. We've got excerpts from Michael Talbot's The Holographic Universe, David R. Hawkins' books on consciousness and the ego, Barbara Marciniak's Bringers of the Dawn,
Oh, and you even threw in Edward Bernays' propaganda to round things out.
and a little peek into something called the Sovereign Charter Trust Group.
Color me intrigued, but also a little wary of going too far down the rabbit hole.
Don't worry, I'll be here to help you navigate. Let's start with something that might blow your mind a little bit, this idea that reality is actually a hologram. Talbot, in The Holographic Universe, puts it out there.
Okay.
Our brains mathematically construct objective reality by interpreting frequencies that are ultimately projections from another dimension.
Okay, whoa. So everything we see, touch, and experience is just a really sophisticated illusion. That's a lot to process.
It is. Talbot draws on the work of Carl Pergram, who found that memories and even vision aren't neatly stored in specific brain regions, but are somehow distributed throughout. Think about it. You can remove parts of the brain and people can still perform visual tasks.
Right.
It's like each piece contains the whole picture, just like a hologram.
Right. I vaguely remember that from science class.
Yeah.
But how does this connect to the idea of frequencies being projected from another dimension?
Well, that's where physicist David Bohm's concept of the implicate order comes in.
Okay.
Imagine a deeper, hidden level of reality, a realm of pure potential that's projecting the world we experience.
So our brains are picking up on this blueprint like receivers and translating it into the reality we perceive. Are we all walking around with mini hologram projectors in our heads?
That's a really interesting way to think about it. And this holographic model might explain some things that have puzzled scientists for a long time. Talbot gives the example of phantom limb syndrome, where someone who's lost a limb can still feel sensations in it. If the brain is working with the holographic blueprint of the body, that phantom limb might still exist as an energy pattern, as a frequency.
Okay, that's both amazing and a little creepy.
Uh-huh.
But if our brains are so powerful, how much control do we actually have over what we experience?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Yeah, and this is where David R. Hawkins comes in. He dives deep into the power of consciousness in his books and how different levels of awareness affect our perception.
This reminds me of something Barbara Marciniak talks about in Bringers of the Dawn, this idea of a family of light who have access to special knowledge. Is she talking about different levels of consciousness too?
She is, in a way. Hawkins actually created a map of consciousness, a scale from 1 to 1,000 that measures the energy levels of different emotions, states of being,
Right.
even historical figures.
Wait, so emotions have different energy levels. How does he even measure that?
Hawkins uses kinesiology or muscle testing to determine these calibrations. It's a bit controversial, but essentially it involves applying pressure to someone's arm while they focus on a particular concept or thought.
Interesting.
If the arm weakens, it's considered a low energy level, a no response. If it stays strong, it's a higher energy level, a yes.
So it's like the body's giving a physical response to the energy of the thought. I've heard of muscle testing, but I never knew it was used for something like this.
Yeah, it's definitely a unique approach.
Yeah.
To give you an idea of how this map works, Hawkins calibrates courage at 200. Anything below that is considered force, and anything above is considered true power. Apathy, for example, sits way down at 50, while anger is at 150.
Wow, so where does enlightenment land on this scale?
Hawkins places that at a whopping 700 to 1,000,
Oh, wow.
the level achieved by figures like Buddha and Jesus.
Okay, that makes you wonder where you fall on that scale and how you might raise your own energy level.
Exactly, and that's a question we can definitely explore further as we delve deeper into these sources. Makes you think about the potential we all have for growth and change, right? Hawkins argues that understanding the ego and its illusions is key to raising our consciousness.
That makes sense, but I feel like the ego is such a slippery concept.
Yeah.
How does Hawkins define it exactly?
He calls it a compilation of positionalities held together by vanity and fear. Basically, that part of us that's constantly seeking external validation, clinging to a sense of self-importance, driven by fear of loss.
Okay, that rings true for me.
Yeah,
I can definitely see how that kind of thinking would keep you stuck in a lower energy state.
absolutely. And he suggests that we can actually de-energize the ego through practices like acceptance, surrender, recognizing that we are not our thoughts, which is a lot easier said than done, in my experience.
Right. It's like our thoughts feel so real, so much a part of who we are. But if we can learn to detach from them,
Yeah.
maybe that's how we start to access that higher level of consciousness.
That's the idea, and it connects back to what Talbot was saying about the power of belief. He gives some pretty mind-blowing examples of the placebo effect. Like a cancer patient whose tumor shrank when he was given a placebo he believed was a powerful new drug.
Whoa, so our thoughts can literally affect our physical reality. That's both incredible and a little terrifying, isn't it?
Yeah?
I mean, if we're creating our reality with our thoughts, what does that mean for all the negativity and suffering in the world?
That's a deep question, and one that I think both Hawkins and Marciniak would say points to the importance of taking responsibility for the energy we're putting out into the world.
Okay, I'm starting to see where this is going. Marciniak talks about this family of light coming to Earth to help humanity evolve. Is she saying we all have a responsibility to raise our consciousness, not just for our own benefit, but for the good of the whole planet?
That's definitely a theme in her work. And Hawkins talks about the evolution of consciousness as a journey from force to power, from fear to love. He believes that as more individuals raise their level of awareness, it can actually shift the collective consciousness.
So it's like a ripple effect.
Yeah.
Our individual choices can impact the energy of the whole. That's pretty powerful stuff.
It is. But let's not forget the other side of the coin here. Bernays, in Propaganda, shows us how easily our thoughts and desires can be manipulated, especially when we're operating from those lower levels of consciousness,
Right.
driven by fear and insecurity.
Right. He was basically the father of public relations, and he believed that if you understood the psychology of the masses, you could influence their behavior without them even realizing it.
Yeah,
It's kind of creepy if you think about it.
it is. He even talks about how the entertainment industry uses propaganda to shape public opinion and consumer behavior.
So all those ads and movies and TV shows, they're not just entertainment. They're subtly programming our minds.
That's what Bernays argued. And if we connect this to Hawkins' work, we can see how those messages might be even more effective when they tap into our ego's fears and desires. It's like we're more susceptible to manipulation when we're operating from those lower energy levels.
This is making me rethink my whole relationship with media. How do we even begin to protect ourselves from this kind of subtle influence?
That's where discernment comes in. Hawkins would say that as we raise our consciousness, we become less easily swayed by external forces. We start to see through the illusions, the manipulation, and make choices that are more aligned with our true selves.
So it's not just about being aware of the propaganda, it's about raising our own level of awareness so we're less vulnerable to it in the first place.
Exactly. And that brings us to the next source, which takes us down a slightly different path. William Cooper's Behold a Pale Horse.
This is the one about conspiracy theories, right? I have to admit, I'm always a little hesitant to go too far down that rabbit hole.
I understand. It's important to approach these kinds of claims with a healthy dose of skepticism. But Cooper does raise some interesting points, even if you don't buy into all of his theories.
Like what, for example?
Well, he talks about a secret group called Majesty 12 that supposedly controls all information about extraterrestrial contact. And he claims that governments are using techniques like mind control and population control to manipulate the masses.
Okay, that definitely sounds like conspiracy theory territory.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, how does this connect to what we've been talking about with consciousness, the ego, and propaganda?
Well, if we consider the possibility that there are forces at work that we're not fully aware of,
Right.
it highlights the importance of critical thinking and discernment.
So it's not about blindly accepting or rejecting everything we hear,
Right,
but about questioning, researching, and forming our own conclusions.
exactly. And perhaps some of the things that seem out there today might become more mainstream as our understanding of reality expands.
That's an interesting thought. So this Sovereign Charter Trust Group document you mentioned,
Yeah.
where does that fit into all of this?
That's the real wild card in this mix. It purports to outline the structure and goals of a powerful but hidden organization. It's very detailed, with talk of gold reserves, private placement paper,
Wow.
and even an alternative system of governance.
Wait, are you saying this group is claiming to have its own financial system and government? That sounds like something straight out of a dystopian novel.
It does, doesn't it? But the language is very specific, very technical. It's hard to say whether it's a genuine document, a work of fiction, or something in between.
So it's a mystery wrapped in an enigma,
Yeah.
maybe with a side of conspiracy theory. This deep dive is definitely taking us on a wild ride. But before we get too lost in speculation, I want to come back to something you said earlier about the power of choice. If our reality is shaped by our thoughts, our beliefs, even our subconscious programming.
Right.
Does that mean we have the power to change it?
That's the big question, isn't it? And I think all of these sources, in their own way, point to the possibility of creating a different reality, both individually and collectively.
But how do we do that? Where do we even begin?
I think it starts with awareness, recognizing the power of our thoughts, the illusions of the ego, and the subtle ways we're being influenced. From there, we can start to make more conscious choices about the information we consume, the energy we put out into the world, and the reality we want to create.
So it's not about like trying to control every little thing, right? But about being more conscious, more intentional in our thoughts and our actions.
Exactly. It's about shifting our focus from fear and limitation to possibility and empowerment.
Okay.
And this brings us back to the holographic model. If reality is ultimately a projection of a deeper interconnected field,
Right.
then maybe we can tap into that field, that source of infinite potential, and create something new.
That's a pretty mind-blowing concept. But how do we actually do that? I mean, it's one thing to talk about raising our consciousness, but what are the practical steps we can take to make that happen?
Well, Hawkins suggests a variety of techniques, including meditation, forgiveness, and practicing unconditional love.
Okay. Those sound familiar. A lot of spiritual traditions emphasize those kinds of practices.
Right.
But how do they actually work to raise our consciousness?
Hawkers would say that these practices help us detach from the ego's limiting beliefs and align with a higher frequency of energy. He believes that as we cultivate love, compassion, and understanding,
Yeah.
we literally raise our vibration and become more connected to the source of all creation.
It's like we're tuning into a different channel of reality.
Exactly. And Marciniak would agree with that. She talks about the importance of choosing thoughts and beliefs that empower us
Okay.
rather than those that keep us trapped in fear and limitation.
So it's about becoming aware of our internal dialogue, the stories we tell ourselves, and choosing to rewrite those stories.
Precisely. And this is where I think Bernays' work on propaganda offers a valuable, albeit unintended, lesson.
Okay.
By understanding how our minds can be influenced, we can become more conscious of the messages we're absorbing and choose to reject those that don't serve us.
So it's like turning the tables on the manipulators, using their techniques to empower ourselves rather than be controlled by them.
Exactly. And this idea of taking back our power is also a key theme in Cooper's work, even though he approaches it from a more conspiratorial angle. He encourages us to question authority, to do our own research, and to reclaim our sovereignty as individuals.
So even though these sources come from very different perspectives, they all seem to be pointing in the same direction, towards a more conscious, empowered, and responsible way of being in the world.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. And perhaps that's the most important takeaway from this deep dive. We have a choice. We can choose to remain asleep, caught in the illusions of the ego and the manipulations of external forces. Or we can choose to awaken, to step into our power, and to co-create a reality that reflects our highest potential.
Wow, that's quite a call to action. But it's also incredibly inspiring. It makes you realize that even though the world might seem chaotic and uncertain, we each have a role to play in shaping a better future.
And that's the beauty of it. It's not about waiting for someone else to save us or fix things. It's about each of us taking responsibility for our own consciousness, our own actions, and our own contribution to the collective good.
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm feeling a renewed sense of hope and possibility after this deep dive.
Yeah.
It's been quite a journey exploring all these different perspectives and connecting the dots between them.
It has been a fascinating exploration, and I hope it's inspired you, dear listener, to continue your own journey of discovery, to question, to seek, to challenge, and to ultimately create a reality that reflects your own unique vision of truth, beauty, and love.
Beautifully said. And remember, this is just the beginning. The real exploration starts now. Until next time, keep diving deep and keep reaching for the stars.